Welcome to the Mindful CIO Podcast, where we explore the human side of tech leadership and what it takes to mindfully and sustainably lead high-performing tech teams. Hello, I'm your host, Nathalie Heynderickx, executive coach, leadership facilitator, and founder of the Mindful CIO community. In today's episode, I'm joined by Miranda Ratajski, Chief Information Officer of Group Business Units at Westpac. With over 25 years of global experience across government, telecom, and finance, Miranda is known for her ability to lead large-scale digital transformations while championing diversity and fostering high-performing human-centered teams. In this episode, we explore Miranda's approach to healthy culture, psychological safety, and inclusive leadership. She shares candid reflections from her first job managing 80 teenage girls at Coles, all the way through to building diverse and empowered teams in one of Australia's most iconic institutions. We also talk about her yoga practice, self-care rituals, and how presence, compassion, and authenticity are central to her leadership philosophy. And don't miss her powerful call to action on diversity and why accessibility is a leadership imperative. Let's dive in. Welcome to the Mindful CIO Podcast, where we explore the human side of tech leadership. Today we have Miranda Ratajski. Miranda is the CIO of Group Business Units at Westpac, with over 25 years of global experience leading complex digital transformations across government, telecom, and financial services. Known for building high-performing teams and uplifting customer and employee experiences, Miranda is also a passionate advocate for diversity in tech, and a volunteer yoga teacher. She's been widely recognized for her leadership and has received several awards, including recent honors from Women Banking in Finance, Atlantia, and Women in Tech Network, to name a few. So a warm welcome, Miranda. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm beyond delighted to have you with us today.
Great to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. You're welcome. So, Miranda, let's get started with, I usually start every episode the same. So we'd love to hear from you. We had a very, very reduced version of your bio. It would be good to hear from you something that we cannot find on LinkedIn, maybe a personal fact, something that you're comfortable to share with the listeners, please.
Absolutely. So something that you won't find out about me via Google or LinkedIn, that I actually started my human-centric leadership story almost 40 years ago working in a Coles supermarket. It was my first job and I was a part-time front-end controller. And we used to roster and manage 80 teenage girls. Now, for any of you that have got teenage daughters or have to deal with teenagers, you can imagine what that was like. Somebody would be upset every shift. They'd fight with their mum or they'd fight with their dad or they'd fail an exam or something would happen. And, I was a teenager at the same time. So I was going through the same thing. But what it taught me about human-centric leadership is you not only need to understand the people you're working with, you need to understand your customers, but you also really need to understand yourself, because how you turn up as a human-centric leader has such a strong impact on everyone else. And of course, being in a supermarket, most people don't really like having to go to the supermarket. So I learned a lot about being very customer-centric, really looking after the people we're working and looking after myself to make sure I brought the best part of me to work. I learned a lot about leadership in Coles.
Wonderful. Thanks, Miranda. And obviously very, very transferable skills, right? That you learned that in that experience. Looking at the Mindful CIO Manifesto, and now, as you know, the Mindful CIO community, it's grounded on the principles of the Mindful CIO Manifesto. The 1.0, we have the 10 declarations, and 2.0, we have the 4 principles. So which of those principles or declarations do you relate the most, Miranda, with?
The one that, they're all great, but the one that really stood out for me was healthy culture in 2.0. That was the one that I had a look at and really spent a little bit of time reflecting on what that actually meant to me. And what that really means to me is creating a psychologically safe environment for all of our people. And I know that gets thrown about a lot, but I really genuinely want to have an environment where people feel psychologically safe. And what that means for me, it's a place where people feel that they can speak up. You know, at Westpac, it's really important that we have what we call an upstander culture, where people can feel that they need to speak up and should speak up and can speak up when it's appropriate. Well, not even when it's appropriate. It's just a speak up culture. And I've done a number of different things in my team to really make sure we promote that. So one of the things I do is I have regular skip level meetings with lots of different people at all the levels in my part of the organisation. And what I do is actually say to people at the front of the beginning of the meeting is, I really want to have an environment where everybody gets a chance to speak. So if some people aren't speaking up as much as some of the others, I'll often ask them to put their question just in the car park for a minute. So if someone's asked a lot of questions already, to give other people a chance to speak up, but also give people other opportunities to speak up, because I know not everybody's always comfortable speaking up in certain environments. So one of the things I'm really mindful about with that healthy culture is making sure that I'm accessible and people can get to me if they want to get to me. And that just means, you know, for example, I'm in the office every day. And if it means if somebody approaches me and I'm busy and going to something else, if I make a commitment to talking or getting back to them, that I make sure I do that. And also just making sure that there's opportunities for people to give lots of very regular feedback via different forums. We have the surveys, we have the skip level meetings, we have an employee engagement working group, and they focus on particular results from some of the engagement surveys we have. So that healthy culture covers a whole lot of different levels and different channels for people to be able to make sure that they feel good speaking up and that they're encouraged to speak up. But I think the other thing that really impacts that is having very diverse cultures and diverse approaches in our teams, because that means if people see other people like them speaking up, they know that they can too. So all of those things I think are really important contributors to a healthy culture.
Wonderful, thank you. And you touched on psychological safety. And I'm sure you're familiar with Project Aristoteles from Google, and speaking up. And I think they talk about turn taking, that's and ostentation listening, which are the two elements of psychological safety. So, and that's the foundation of a healthy culture based on their experience. And your comment around how some people not necessarily might feel comfortable to speak up in a meeting, and you're making yourself available for them, that's you catering for the diversity, right? Because different people have different needs, different motivations, and different levels of comfort for being assertive and being heard in a group. So I can see already your passion for diversity coming through in establishing psychological safety as well. Yeah.
And because I think, that healthy culture is a key contributor to a high-performing team. COVID taught me a lot about different types of diversity in people, because as you probably guessed, I'm just a little bit extroverted and my husband is not. And we spent a lot of COVID on a farm in Victoria, not being able to travel because of all the restrictions. And whilst he was incredibly happy because he's a little bit more introverted, because we had, we were together and we had the dogs and we were on the farm and it was very quiet and it was great. Whereas I was really suffering not being around people. So I was setting up Zooms and questions that we would answer around groups of my friends. And, it really made me think a lot more about how different people get their energy needs met and how they don't, and how you provide those environments that are more appropriate for what different people need.
Thanks for sharing, Miranda. Now, looking into, you kind of touched on already a little bit, having a farm, and that opportunity. So self-care strategies, rituals, routines, of course, being a volunteer. Love to hear more about that if you like. That's something that I did. I did my yoga teacher training with the intention to deepen my own practice, 10 years ago, and then end up teaching a little bit as well when I was with AGL. So it would be great to hear if you're willing to talk about, but self-care strategies in general, routines, rituals, how do we, because you have a very, very busy, of course, highly demanding, complex role. So how do you keep yourself sane mentally, emotionally, physically, what do you do in a regular basis or maybe not so regular basis?
Look, I'd love to tell you it was really easy and I do it really well and I'm on top of it all the time, but we know that's absolutely not the case. Well, certainly not for me. I have a number of different things I do as self-care routines, but what I do is have some guardrails set up with the support network around me who actually will sometimes call out to me if, maybe I'm not as, what's the word? Not where I could potentially be. And it changes all the time. And I think one of the things I've learned the most about self-care strategies is actually giving myself a bit of a break. Because do you know what I mean? Because when, we all have these fantastic ideas around how it's going to work. I'm going to do yoga for this many hours a day. I'm going to get this many hours sleep a night. And before you know it, you're doing a general ledger upgrade and, you're spending a lot more time working than you probably, had planned on. So I think the most important self-care thing you can do is be kind to yourself. You're not quite on the schedule you thought you were going to do. See what you can do to make that up. Or if not, just realize that there might be some other things you can do instead. I've been a yoga practitioner for almost 30 years now. And like you, I did my yoga teacher training with the pure purpose of thinking it would teach me more about my yoga practice. I was really surprised to learn how much I love teaching yoga and how much, and it's not dissimilar to any other type of leadership because it's that same sense of satisfaction you get when somebody at work does something that they didn't think they could do. It's exactly that same when you have someone who goes to do an asana who you knew 2 years ago had said, I'm never going to be able to do that. And then they do it. So it's some of the principles are very similar. It's, giving people the techniques, giving them the sport, giving them the space to try it on their own, and the outcome when they can do it is really exciting. I think I know when I have, I'm eating well, I'm sleeping well, I'm doing enough yoga, I'm getting enough exercise. I also have 2 big dogs that need lots of exercise. And there's no getting away without walking them. So one of the other things I do is try to be very much in the moment. Just for example, if I'm walking the dogs on the beach, I'm walking the dogs on the beach. I'm not listening to a podcast. I'm not trying to do anything else or talking on the phone. I'm just trying to stay very in the moment like that because, one of the biggest assets we've got is our brains. And, obviously we all look after our bodies and we know we need to and why we need to. But that's an important vessel for our brains and making sure we look after them as well. But I will confess, I don't meditate as much as I should. I don't do as much as I should, but I do my best at self-care.
Thanks, Miranda. Thanks for being so honest and, true and authentic because, yes, I think the especially being, I don't know if I can call you a high achiever, look at your bio, you're clearly a high achiever, that can play even in the, funnily enough, even in the well-being space, that inner critic can come and bite us. So, as you said, being kind and compassionate to yourself, the self-compassion, and using those incidental present when walking the dog, not multitasking, listening to a podcast and optimizing, present walking the dog. I think that goes a long way. Yeah.
And I still listen to podcasts. I just do it very, very, very intentionally instead of trying to juggle too many things at a time.
Super. Thank you. Switching gears to talk about great leadership models. Sometimes this is a question that I ask most of the guest speakers as well, and people come up with the most varied answers. Sometimes they don't have a particular leadership model, role model, or will be a number of people, or, the other day I had someone said actually, a type of dog. So what about you? Yes, listen to the last episode with Adam. Very interesting take. So any great role models of leadership that you had exposure and pleasure to work with, Miranda, or public figures that you admire?
There have been so many. And, what I think about when I think about role modeling leadership is how important it is to take a role model, to take a type of approach to leadership that's authentic to you. And for me, I've always been very curious about different leaders and the way that they do things. And often if I'm in a meeting and I notice somebody holding the room extremely well or getting great outcomes, often I try and make sure I leave a little bit of time in those meetings to be an observer and look at them and think, how are they doing that? What values are coming across? What techniques are they doing? So when I thought about, I didn't come up with one particular leader. I came up with a number of different examples from different things that I've seen. And it made me, I think, more about the values that they've shown me. And I think the key one I've mentioned already is authenticity. People respond so much better to authenticity than they do someone who's trying to behave like someone else, even if it's really well-intentioned from a leadership perspective. And the other thing that I thought about was a quality I've seen in a lot of leaders I really admire is integrity. I think that one is absolutely critical. One of the other qualities I also thought about was accessibility, as I said earlier. And it's, and accessibility is a really important thing to me in its fullest definition of the word, accessibility to all the different aspects of life that we have. But in this particular case, accessibility to leaders. I've had some fantastic leaders who, even when they were really busy, I knew they would find time for me. And they would, even if it wasn't at that exact moment, they would say, we'll get back to you. And they would make sure they get back to you, when they said they would, and knowing when you needed a little bit more support than others. I think, one of the other values I also thought about that's really important to me in leaders is vision. I love working with other leaders who've got a vision and a way to do things better, and a way in particular to measure how they're going to do things better. So you've got those data points and you can demonstrate the value that you've added. And knowing that takes a certain amount of resilience. Leadership in any form takes resilience. If it was easy, anyone could do it well. And we know that's certainly not always the case. But everybody brings a different key quality or key skill or a key value to leadership. So I don't think I've found the perfect leadership style even for myself yet, but I'm still very curious about how lots of people do it in different ways, and still know there's a lot for me to learn.
Super. Thanks, Miranda. When I was doing my homework and listening to some of the other podcasts that you've been recently, you made a comment in one of those, I think it was Women Banking Finance, that you're definitely not a micromanager, but you also, although you would give space and power, your direct reports, you also be there when they need to provide the support. And that made me think of situational leadership, which is really understanding the level of skill and will of your direct reports, and then adjusting your leadership style to, do I need to be really checking in frequently, providing support, or can I give a lot of space and this person has the knowledge, the skills, the motivation to just go and, and run with it. So, yeah.
And I think some of that's a reflection of my own preference for style, a style of leadership. I really, and it's often when I'm interviewing people, they ask me about my leadership style, and I say to them, I can tell you, I am absolutely not a micromanager. And you can see, often I see people thinking, really? And I recruit people who know how to do their jobs. They don't need me to tell them how to do their jobs. My view is, I just need to be there if people need me, and to help get obstacles out of people's way so they can just get on with the job that they need to do. And I think that leads to higher performing teams where people know within certain guardrails they're completely empowered and they can just get on with it. But if something's not feeling right or they've got some concerns, that I'll absolutely be there to support them.
Cool. Let's switch gears, Miranda, to talk about the non, well, we're talking about already, the non-aspects, the non-technical aspects of being a tech executive. So that's really the focus here of the Mindful CIO podcast. So often when I'm coaching clients, topics that come up that often is in the bottleneck, it's around, attracting, retaining talent, or securing budget, getting approval, driving innovation and change. What else? Managing competing priorities and multiple stakeholders. So what stories, if any, comes to mind when you think about those aspects that are not related to the tech side, that often is actually when what's the expression, when the rubber hits the
road?
The road, yes. What comes to mind?
One of the stories around that for me, it comes back to some of my earlier family life. So my mother left school when she was 12 because it was felt it was more important for her brothers to go to school and get an education than it was for her, because they were going to get married and have kids. And, what that did was really make her very focused on continuing her education herself. And so she put herself through high school, she put herself through nursing school, and she went on to become a midwife. And what that then in turn she did was use her privilege to make sure we had the opportunities. I'm the eldest of 3 girls, and she made sure that we all had the opportunity to continue our education. But what was really interesting is I remember when I was about 15 standing around having a conversation with my father about what I was going to study at university. And he said, well, you're only going to get married and have kids. Now, you can imagine how horrified my mother was when she heard that, knowing what she'd been through. And that really encouraged me to think about what was important to me and what I needed to do, for my education. And that was always really strongly supported at home. And, I went on to have 3 degrees by the time I was 28 years old, with the full support of my mother. And what she also supported me was to make me realize that, she would support me to do whatever I thought I wanted to do. And, for example, I played Aussie rules as a little girl, and she was like, yeah, sure. And what that really taught me was about resilience, about, having to provide accessibility for some people who may not always get access to things that they would otherwise. And also about having that support and belief in yourself that you could win and you could do things that, you maybe wouldn't otherwise think that you could do. And when we talked previously about that support that you give people, whether it be teaching them yoga asanas or promoting them to run a project that they maybe don't think that they could do, is helping other people understand that they can win and they can do those things as well. So I think having that curiosity and resilience applies to all those other things that you've talked about. So how do you make sure you've got clear value of the epics or proposals that you're putting up for the investment slate? You're clear around what you need, you're clear in the belief you can do it, and you're clear around the value that initiative is going to add. And that's going to help you, because if people can see the clarity of the value of what you're going to deliver, they're more than likely to want to invest it and support it and get behind it. And I think that also helps attract people and talent to teams like that. If they see you getting more work allocated to your area, or if they see that you're getting investment slate funding to your area, that's going to attract them to come and want to be part of that high performing team that is getting more resources and more opportunities to demonstrate things. And I think leading towards that prioritization piece, that prioritization applies to all aspects of my life. And I think even when we're talking about self-care, how do you prioritize the right self-care at the right time? None of us have the time to do everything that we want to be able to do, or the resources to be able to do everything that we want to do, be that at work on a project basis or anywhere in our lives. So being really clear on what your purpose is, really being clear on the value of things that are going to deliver so you can help prioritize what you're going to do, I think really helps. And what people, I find, respond really well to that prioritization, because then what they know is what to focus on delivering. And then once that's done, you can move further down the backlog. But that prioritization is really, really, really critical, because that's how we make sure we're focusing on the right things at the right time.
Yes, absolutely. And what I heard the other day is one guest speaker talking about the importance of prioritizing also, or selecting, being clear on what not to do, right? What should we not do? Because as you said, it's so easy to say, okay, be very ambitious with all the projects, initiatives that you perhaps desire, would love to do, but having no limited resource and capacity, having clarity on what you're not going to do is also important.
And I think it's like a portfolio approach. So if you've got your portfolio of different things you need to do, and as you say, you groom that backlog. So these are the things we're not doing, and if something needs to be uplifted into that list of things we're doing, potentially that means something has to come off. And that means being comfortable with saying no sometimes. And whilst that can be a bit difficult, if you're clear on the value of what you're delivering and why the thing you're pushing up the list is going to deliver more value, it makes that conversation a little bit easier. Never completely easy, but a little easier.
Yes, thank you. I'm thinking of how we met very briefly in person, Miranda. I think we're connected on LinkedIn for a couple of years now, but the first time that I met you in person was here in Melbourne, Tech Diversity 2023. You delivered this absolutely stunning keynote, and I was like, wow, I need to go and talk to her. You mentioned, the importance of ethics in AI. You share a little bit of your personal story. So I was very, very impressed. And of course, with the developments that we had this year, in the world around diversity and the ripple effect that it is having to, organizations, especially the global, firms and some companies in Australia as well. I know that you're very, very committed to diversity, and Westpac, also has a very strong commitment to diversity. But curious to hear from you. How is that, impacting you, Westpac, maybe we shouldn't be talking on behalf of Westpac here, but, how do you see, diversity now with those developments early this year?
So I feel very privileged to work at Westpac. Westpac's been around for 208 years, and Westpac has been at the forefront of diversity on a number of different fronts. We had the first female bank teller, we had the first female bank manager, and we had the first female CEO of the big four banks in Australia, Gail Kelly. In addition to that, we have a number of employee advocacy groups which look after particular diversity groups, and each one of the members of the executive team that report into our CEO are sponsors of those diversity groups. So I'm really fortunate to work in an environment where diversity is treated as a non-negotiable. And, we're continuing with that. And I've been fortunate that I am the sponsor for diversity in technology. And we've run a number of programs to really promote diversity in technology. One of the things about working in technology and financial services is it's a bit of a double whammy, because both of them are known for having lower levels of gender diversity compared to some other industries, which, I have to be brutally honest, motivates me even more. So
it's a challenge.
It is. And knowing that, on average, 27% of technology workforce is female, and that roughly 38% of women are put off joining technology because they see it as a bit of a bro culture. I'm really fortunate that we get resources to run programs to start moving that in the opposite direction. 50% of my leadership team is female. We have much higher than the average of technology gender diversity in technology at Westpac, and we're growing at 1.5 times the industry rate of getting better gender diversity running. Some of the programs we've run, run one recently for the second time, which is called Empower Up. And it is a program that is focused on bringing women back into the workforce after they've had a break. And not necessarily just people with technology experience. And it can be for a variety of reasons that people have had that career break. It could be for parenting, for looking after their parents, travel, health, any reason, it doesn't matter. And we had a phenomenal response to that. And what we've designed is a very particular program to help support people coming back into the workforce. And we found that over 92% of the people who applied for our Empower Up program already had technology experience. So it's fantastic because it's helping us uplift those diversity allocations that we've got. But it's also bringing people who bring a whole lot of amazing experience that they've got already into the bank as well. So I'm really fortunate to be in a position where, as I said, we treat diversity as a non-negotiable. I'm also the sponsor for accessibility, the co-sponsor for accessibility inclusion, and we were one of the first partners of the Australian Network Disability. And it's really great to see that history of Westpac and how it continues to be a very strong supporter of diversity. Makes me really happy.
Mm, I'm sure it does. And I'm conscious that you also recognize that diversity goes way beyond, gender, as you mentioned, accessibility, diversity of thought. I think neurodivergency, it's becoming more and more common. I think many organizations now making space for that, especially in the tech space. Now, coming from tech myself, I can relate to your comments around the percentage. Finance and tech is even less usual to see women, unfortunately, but those stats are getting better. And I remember when I left AGL for my sabbatical before I changed careers, I was in the data analytics, in business intelligence, and I told my leader, good luck. I was the only woman in the whole team. Yes. yes, back then. So that was 2015. Okay, so you mentioned challenge, the word challenge a couple of times, Miranda. So what would be a current challenge that you're facing? I'm sure there are many with the size and the complexity of your role, but what's one challenge that you're currently facing that you feel comfortable to talk about, how you're navigating, and perhaps something that could be useful for our listeners to hear?
Yeah, look, I think one of the challenges, and we touched on this earlier in this discussion, is also is around how you prioritize what you do. And, particularly at work, there's a number of competing priorities that we have. And I think it's an ongoing process. Sometimes I'd like to think you may talk about challenges that sort of have a start and a finish, a bit like a project, but this one's an ongoing one, I think for everyone. And it's really important to have clarity around what are the priorities for us to deliver on and why. So not just what they are and why they are, and really making sure we communicate effectively around that. Because it's one thing to just issue a list and that's the thing, but we work really tightly with prioritizing what we do with the strategy that we have for Westpac, with the strategy that we have for technology, and then the strategy that we have for my area. And the challenge is there is just no way we can do everything that we'd like to do. And I look after very diverse areas as well. So balancing all of the different priorities that we have for the different areas. And that challenge for me means I rely very, very heavily on my leadership team, and they rely very heavily on their people to have that two-way feedback loop on what can we do, what is the highest priority to do, and what does that mean that we're not going to do? And we touched on that earlier as well. And I think that's an ongoing challenge for everyone. There's cost constraints we've got to make sure we're hitting our revenue targets, and all of those are that macro environment that comes down to deciding what we're going to do and what we're not going to do, and having ongoing regular feedback and touch points with my leadership team is critical for that, because they can say there are some things that are going phenomenally well and we just keep doing those, but there are some things that maybe are not, and maybe we need to either pivot the way we're doing them, or maybe in some cases, and we had one of those this week, I need to go back to the stakeholders and say we need to stop doing something because we just don't have the resources to do it. And I think it happens at all layers of leadership within the organisation. But I think having that clarity of purpose, the clarity of strategy, and those guardrails for what we can do really helps. But it is always going to be a challenge. All the different jobs I've done in the government, in telco, in banking, it's always been around being really clear on what you can do and what you can't. And I think what really underpins that is really making sure that you're transparent. If there's bad news or you can't do something, it's absolutely critical to let people know as soon as possible, and being able to explain clearly why. And maybe it's not an indefinite no, maybe it's just a not yet, and we can come to it once something else is finished, but being transparent and really communicating those priorities effectively is something that takes quite a bit of effort.
Encourage. Encourage, right? Yeah. Thank you, Miranda. Thanks for talking so openly. And listening to you, I'm thinking full circle to what you mentioned at the start, leading yourself before you're leading others, and that integrity in terms of communicating, having the courage to have those conversations and say, what's actually happening. And I'm thinking of VUCA as well, because I think regardless, of course, you're working for this, huge organization, very high profile role, but even leaders, I have clients who are CIOs in small firms, still facing similar challenges because the volatility, uncertainty, complex ambiguity is everywhere, regardless of the industry or size, something that everyone it's facing. And I think back to, I think the external, and that leads me to think to AI, maybe will be the next question. So I think the external environment is not going to get any easier. I heard you saying in one of the podcasts, things are probably not going to get, slow down, unlikely things will slow down, right? So we need to get better in terms of resilience and clarity of mind, as you said, considering our body is a vessel for our brains, and take really good care so we can show up in the best way possible, because things are not going to slow down. Yeah.
I fundamentally believe this is the slowest rate of change that we're going to see. If you look at those scale of changes through the various industrial revolutions, it's the pace of change that we are seeing is really I don't know if I wouldn't quite go fully exponentially, but there are elements of change that absolutely are going exponentially. And what I think that really impacts is the type of people that we need to have on our teams, people who can deal with, as you call, the VUCA. It's, people who are curious, people who are comfortable with change, because it now is the only constant, and people who are comfortable with knowing things are going to need to be done differently. And so they're people who can get on the front foot about that and be really making sure that we're thinking about how we can do things different and better. And I think that leads itself to almost a portfolio approach to how we do things. There are some things that are just business as usual. We need to make sure that they're done, but we want to automate as much as possible. We want to make sure we're doing them as efficiently as possible. But there's also some other areas of innovation where we need to approach those slightly differently, because they're newer and some of them we haven't done before, so they can take a slightly different skill set.
Oh, Miranda, it's been a pleasure. It feels like I could talk to you for another couple of hours, but probably should let you go. Get back to, finalizing, wrapping up your day. Maybe one way that I like to close the conversation is inviting speakers to share, the top tip, number one strategy, or top 3 strategies about how to sustainably, mindfully lead high-performing tech teams. So in a way that is sustainable, because one thing is leading high performing tech teams, but we can lead people to burn out, right? And we don't want that. So how can we lead high performing tech teams in a sustainable and mindful way? Do you have any, in addition to all the wisdom, all the intel you already shared with us, any other tips that comes to mind?
Yes. It's really, so often when people talk about technology, they get really focused on the technology. And the biggest tip for me on that, which is maybe a little bit unusual coming from a CIO, is not to look at the technology in isolation, is absolutely looking at the people and the process that go along with that technology. Because you can automate and just continue to deliver things faster, but you need to take that step back and make sure, are you delivering the right things faster? And do you still need to deliver all of those things? So making sure that you've got the right people who have given you the right inputs on what you're going to do, that you've looked at those processes and made sure they're the right processes and they're giving you the right outcomes that you still want to deliver on, and using them to even help determine what technology that you absolutely need to have. And then, as you say, what are the things you might not need straight away? And then as you prioritize and groom that backlog for delivery. When setting up those teams, it's absolutely critical to have the right individuals with the right skills to deliver the various elements of the initiatives. But what's also really important is to make sure that the sum of those parts is greater than the individual. So you've got the right people who work together to have a high-performing team, and that they're working well together. And it's something that by picking the right individuals and having the right leadership and the right culture means that you're going to end up with those high-performing teams. And there's going to be some parts of the teams that are busier at some stages and some of the others. And so keeping an eye on those, those valleys and peaks of busyness and making sure you've got the right people with the right skills delivering them.
Wonderful. There you go. Wise words from Miranda Ratajski. Thanks so much, Miranda. I look forward. I don't know if you're going to make it to the Tech Diversity. This time will be in August, I think, later in the year. Instead of last year was just the night before my birthday. So I was like, oh my God, what a perfect time. But now we're in August. So hopefully I'll see you there, Miranda. Thanks so much for your time and your energy. Any final words, any final thoughts that you'd like to share with the listeners before we go?
Absolutely. So I have a quote that I like to use, and it comes from that not so famous philosopher for technology leadership, but a famous philosopher nonetheless, and it's Dr. Seuss. And the quote is, "Today you are you, that is truer than true. There is no one alive who is youer than you." And for me, that really helps support those values of authenticity and integrity. And that for me is critical to underpinning strong leadership.
Thanks for tuning in and joining our discussion today. If you're learning from this podcast, please subscribe, give us a good rating, and share it with your friends. If you have any questions or suggestions about guests you'd like me to interview here in the Mindful CIO podcast, please share in the comments below. Last but not least, thank you for your interest in the human side of tech leadership. See you in the next episode.